They say family is supposed to have your back. Mine handed me a pink slip. I'll never forget that day. The boardroom smelled of expensive cologne, tension, and betrayal. The kind of smell that stays with you long after the moment is gone. It was a Thursday, bright, cruelly normal. I woke up thinking I'd attend another morning meeting, discuss quarterly goals, then have lunch with my husband afterward. Instead, I walked into the room where my world quietly ended. My name is Alina. I was the head of product development at Collins Technologies, one of the top luxury tech companies in the country. And my CEO. My father-in-law, Richard Collins, a man who smiled like he invented power itself. When I married his son, Ethan, Richard told me, "Welcome to the family. You're one of us now." Back then, I believed him. But that morning, as I stepped into the glass-walled boardroom and saw the tight faces around the table, I realized what I really was: disposable. "Morning," I said, setting my laptop down, ready to start. The room was silent. Richard didn't even look up at me. He was flipping through a file, the sound of the paper sharp, deliberate. Finally, he looked up, eyes cold and unreadable. "Alina," he said flatly, "we need to talk about your position." I blinked. My position. He folded his hands together. "Yes, there have been concerns." My stomach tightened. Concerns about what? "Your leadership, your decisions, your professionalism." The words felt like punches I didn't see coming. "Professionalism?" I repeated. "Richard, with all due respect, my division just launched our best-selling product line this year. He raised a hand, silencing me. "This isn't personal." But of course it was. Ethan sat beside him, his face pale, eyes fixed on the table. My husband, silent, shrinking, useless. "Ethan," I said softly, "say something." He didn't, he just shifted in his seat. "Mr. Collins," I tried again, my voice shaking. "If this is about performance, I deserve specifics." Richard leaned back, voice calm and cruel. Be honest, Alina, you've never really fit this company's culture. You're emotional, you're impulsive, you take things personally." "I take the business personally because I care," I said, heat rising in my chest. He smiled thinly. "That's exactly the problem. This company isn't about feelings, it's about results. And while your passion is admirable, it's also exhausting." My heart pounded. Exhausting. He sighed as if the decision pained him, but I knew better. "You're fired." The words landed like glass shattering inside me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room blurred, voices fading into static. "You're firing me," I whispered. He nodded once, effective immediately. I looked at Ethan again, desperate, pleading, but he still didn't look at me. "You knew," I asked him quietly. His throat bobbed. It wasn't my decision. My blood turned cold. "But you knew." He didn't answer. That was all the answer I needed. I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. The entire board was watching, half of them pretending to be sorry, the rest pretending to be busy. Richard's voice was calm, almost fatherly. "I'll have HR prepare your exit paperwork. And Alina," he added, "I truly hope you take this as an opportunity to reflect." Reflect. That word echoed in my head like an insult. I gathered my laptop, my notebook, my pen, the same pen I'd used to sign million-dollar deals, and walked out. My heels clicked across the marble floor, loud in the silence. Each step sounded like a goodbye I hadn't planned to give. When I reached the elevator, I finally looked back. Richard was already speaking to someone else. Ethan was still staring at the table. Neither of them followed. The elevator doors closed, and that's when the tears came. Quiet, burning, unwanted. I pressed my palm against my stomach, trying to hold myself together. How could he do this to me? After all my work, my loyalty, my late nights building his company's future. I'd given them everything, my skills, my time, my love. And in one meeting, they took it all away. But worse than being fired was the humiliation. The pitying glances from people I'd led. The whispers that would start the moment I left. Alina Collins, the boss's daughter-in-law who couldn't handle the heat. I knew what they'd say. And maybe that was what hurt the most, that no one would see the truth. That I'd been betrayed, not because I failed, but because I succeeded too much. When I reached the parking lot, I sat in my car for nearly an hour. The world outside went on like nothing had happened. Cars passed, birds sang, people laughed. And I sat there, broken in a world that didn't care. My phone buzzed, Ethan. Ethan, let's talk tonight. Please don't make a scene. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Don't make a scene. As if losing my career, my dignity, and my place in the family wasn't a scene already. I typed one word back. Okay. Then I turned off my phone. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly until the city lights faded behind me. The road stretched ahead, empty, endless. At some point, I pulled over near a lake and sat on the hood of my car, watching the water ripple in the dark. The wind was cold, biting, alive. I wasn't sure what I was anymore. For years, my entire identity had been tied to them, to being a Collins, to proving I was worthy of their name. And now I was no one. But somewhere between the ache in my chest and the cold in my hands, a thought started to grow, small, stubborn, defiant. What if this wasn't the end? What if it was the beginning? I took a deep breath, staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the car window. I looked tired, yes, but I also saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fire. I remembered the girl I used to be before the Collins name, ambitious, curious, fearless. The one who loved technology not for profit, but for what it could create. That girl was still in there. And if they wouldn't give her a place, she'd make one for herself. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a clear mind. I made coffee, sat at my tiny kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then I began to type. Lux Tech Concept Proposal. It wasn't a plan yet, just an idea. But it was mine. That day, I made a list. Find investors. Research gaps in luxury tech markets. Build a prototype. Prove them wrong. And next to the last one, I added in bold letters. Prove myself right. The weeks that followed were a blur. I applied for funding, pitched to anyone who would listen. Most of them laughed, some didn't even let me finish. You were fired by Collins Tech, they'd say, smirking. If they didn't believe in you, why should we? Each rejection stung, but each one also sharpened me. I stopped trying to sound impressive. I started speaking with conviction. This isn't just a company, I'd tell them. It's a movement. Lux Tech will change how people experience technology, not just own it. Eventually, someone listened. A small investor, a woman named Rena, called me after a pitch one night. I can't stop thinking about your idea, she said. You have something real, Alina, let's build it. For the first time since being fired, I felt something powerful stir inside me again, hope. I didn't know if we'd succeed. But I knew I wasn't going to let anyone decide my worth again. That night, as I shut down my laptop, I whispered to myself. They took their name from me. I'll make my own, and it'll shine louder than theirs ever did. I didn't realize it then, but that was the first night of the rest of my life. The night I stopped surviving and started building. Because when my father-in-law said, "You're fired," he didn't end my story. He started it. They say success starts with a dream. But what they don't tell you is that dreams are built on sleepless nights, tears, and the kind of hunger that eats at your soul until you fight back. After that day in the boardroom, my life became quiet, painfully quiet. No meetings. No deadlines. No one saying my name. Just silence. At first, it felt like freedom. Then it felt like falling. The first week after I was fired, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd wake up early, still thinking about checking emails, attending strategy calls, habits that no longer had a purpose. Then the reality would hit. I had nowhere to go. Nothing to do. No one waiting for me. Ethan barely spoke to me. He acted like my firing was his embarrassment. Every conversation turned into something sharp, something cold. You should have handled it better, he said one night. I looked at him, stunned. Handled being humiliated in front of an entire board. He shrugged. My father's decision wasn't personal, Alina. Maybe you took things too emotionally. That word again, emotional. I stared at him across the kitchen table and realized something. He didn't just look like his father. He thought like him too. A week later, I packed a bag and left. No screaming, no threats, just a quiet exit the same way I'd left that company. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. Cracked walls, second-hand furniture, and a view of nothing but power lines and traffic. But it was mine. For the first time in years, no one could tell me where I belonged. I just didn't know yet who I was. Days turned into weeks. I started sketching designs again, tech ideas I'd once dreamed of creating, but had shelved to meet corporate demands. Luxury smart devices that blended beauty and function, things that felt human, not just mechanical. The kind of ideas Richard Collins would have called unnecessary emotion. Now, I didn't need his approval. I opened a notebook and wrote 3 words across the top. Lux Tech, freedom, future. That was my vision. But vision doesn't pay rent. I sold my jewelry first, the bracelet Ethan gave me, the watch his mother passed down to welcome me into the family. That money bought my first second-hand laptop, some software, and enough coffee to survive the nights I couldn't sleep. I worked out of a corner cafe that didn't mind if you stayed too long. I taught myself coding again, brushed up on market research, cold emailed manufacturers, and watched free business lectures online. Every no I'd ever heard replayed in my head, but instead of breaking me, it started fueling me. They said I was too emotional. Fine, I'd pour every ounce of that emotion into my work. They said I wasn't business-minded enough. Fine, I'd become the kind of business they couldn't ignore. Money ran out faster than I expected. One night I checked my balance, $53. I stared at the number, feeling the sting of humiliation rise again. I could almost hear Richard's voice, "You were never fit for this company." For a second, I thought about giving up. But then I remembered that lake. That moment when I promised myself this wasn't the end. So instead of crying, I made a plan. I started freelancing online, designing websites, writing product descriptions, fixing layouts for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me going. Every dollar I earned went into my dream. Every hour I worked brought me closer to independence. And slowly, piece by piece, Lux Tech started taking shape. A logo. A prototype sketch. A story. I built it from scratch, no rich investors, no family name. Just grit and a belief that I still had something to give. One night, while scrolling through an online forum for entrepreneurs, I came across a post about a small tech startup competition. Prize: $25,000 in seed funding. The deadline was in 10 days. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Could I pull it off? No, a voice whispered, "You're not ready." But another voice, quieter, stronger, said, "You've been ready your whole life." So I applied. Those next 10 days were a blur of caffeine, design revisions, and sleepless nights. I turned my tiny apartment into a workshop. Cardboard boxes became stands. My kitchen table became my test bench. When I needed parts, I scoured recycling bins for discarded tech components. By the end of the 10th night, my eyes were red, my hands trembling, but I had it. A prototype. A sleek, smart luxury bracelet that combined fashion with functionality, health tracking, location alerts, and AI integration in a minimalist design. I called it the Halo. I remember the day of the presentation like a movie I can't forget. The conference room was filled with men in suits, all talking about data, profits, and market shares. I stood among them, wearing the same black dress I'd worn the day I was fired, a reminder of where I came from. When it was my turn, my hands shook as I held up the bracelet. "This," I said, "isn't just tech, it's a statement. It's proof that luxury can be smart, elegant, and human." A few judges looked intrigued, most didn't. Until I turned on the bracelet. It glowed soft gold light, pulsing with my heartbeat. "This device connects technology with emotion," I said. "It adapts to your mood, learns your stress patterns, and sends subtle haptic feedback to help you calm down. It listens when no one else does." The room went quiet. When I finished, one of the judges, a woman in her 40s, smiled faintly. "I've seen dozens of pitches today," she said, but none of them made me feel something. That's when I knew. I hadn't just made a product. I'd made a connection. I didn't win first place, but I won something better: attention. That judge, Reena Patel, reached out after the event. "I believe in what you're building," she said. "Let me invest." I couldn't speak. My throat tightened as I tried to thank her. Reena just smiled. "Don't thank me, prove me right." With Reena's investment, I rented a small shared office. A single room with white walls, one desk, and endless possibility. That room became my world. I worked 14-hour days, sometimes sleeping on the office couch. I hired one intern, a bright, nervous student named Maya, who believed in the vision more than I believed in myself some days. We built, we tested, we failed, we fixed. And slowly, Lux Tech began to live. One night, while packaging early prototypes for our first pre-orders, Maya asked quietly, "Do you ever think about them? The ones who fired you?" I paused, sealing a box. "Every day." She hesitated. "Do you want revenge?" I smiled, a small, calm smile. "No, I want results. Revenge fades. Success echoes." She grinned. "Then let's make some noise." Months passed. Orders grew. Investors called. Magazines reached out. Our name, my name, started appearing in places that used to ignore me. Who is Alina Collins, the woman behind Lux Tech? Fired CEO's daughter-in-law, builds million-dollar brand. Every headline felt like a quiet thunderclap, the sound of my redemption. One evening, I received a message that made my breath catch. "Ethan, congratulations. My father saw the article. He wants to talk." I stared at the words for a long time. Months ago, I would have given anything for that message. Now it meant nothing. I typed back, "Tell him I'm busy, building what he thought I couldn't." Then I put the phone down and smiled. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to them. I was living for me. That night, as I walked through the small office, my office, I felt something deep inside shift. I ran my fingers across the wall, still rough from the paint we'd done ourselves. I looked at the glowing halo bracelets lined up neatly, each one a piece of the dream that almost died. And I whispered, "You took everything from me, Richard, but you also gave me this, the fire to rise." I stood there in the dim light, realizing I wasn't just rebuilding a career. I was rebuilding myself. People think strength looks like shouting or fighting. But real strength is quiet. It's the decision to stand back up after the world knocks you down. That's what I did. Every rejection, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it became part of my story. And the story was only beginning. Because the girl who got fired had become the woman who was about to conquer. They say revenge is sweet. But success, that's smoother. It's quiet, powerful, and unstoppable. Months had passed since I'd been fired. Months since I'd sat in that cold boardroom and listened to my father-in-law tell me I wasn't fit for his empire. Now I had my own. When Lux Tech launched its first official product, the Halo, I didn't expect it to explode. I just wanted to prove it could work. We sold out in 48 hours. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the website. But no, the orders were real, the emails were real, the attention was real. People loved it, not because it was the most advanced device, but because it was different. It wasn't cold technology. It was elegant, emotional, alive. For the first time, I didn't just feel like I was building a company. I was building a movement. The morning after the launch, I sat in my office, still small, still cramped, with a cup of coffee and tears in my eyes. Maya burst in, holding her phone. 50,000 followers, she shouted. I blinked. What? On our page, everyone's talking about you. Look. She turned the screen toward me. Videos, reviews, influencers, all calling Lux Tech the future of wearable luxury. I stared at the screen, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. Because I remembered the woman who once sat crying in her car after being fired. And now this. We worked like maniacs after that. The next few weeks were chaos, late nights, supply issues, endless emails. But I didn't mind. Every sleepless night was a reminder that I was no longer powerless. I was building something they couldn't take away. One day, Rena, my first investor, came to visit. She stood in the middle of our growing workspace, smiling like a proud mentor. "I knew you had it in you," she said. I smiled. "You believed before I did." She looked at me, eyes sharp. "What's next?" I hesitated. "Expansion. I want Lux Tech stores, real ones. A brand people can see, touch, experience." Rena raised an eyebrow. "That's a big move." "I'm not afraid of big anymore," I said. "I've already been small." She laughed softly. "Then let's make it happen." 2 months later, I opened the doors to our first boutique in New York City. The night before, I barely slept. I kept thinking of that boardroom, the way Richard had looked at me like I was a mistake he needed to erase. Now my name, was written in gold letters across a glass storefront. Lux Tech. People lined up outside on opening day. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions. One of them leaned in and said, "Elena, is it true your father-in-law owns Collins Technologies, one of your competitors?" I smiled calmly. "Yes, he's in the business of replacing people. I'm in the business of empowering them." The crowd laughed, claps cheered. Inside, I was shaking, but it wasn't fear this time, it was victory. Within 3 months, we opened 2 more stores. By 6 months, Lux Tech had become the fastest-growing luxury brand in the country. People called me the comeback queen, the tech rebel, the woman who built an empire out of rejection. And yet, despite all the noise, I stayed quiet. Because I wasn't doing it to prove anyone wrong anymore. I was doing it to prove myself right. But success has a way of drawing out the ghosts of your past. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the message. "Ethan, we need to talk." I stared at the screen, debating whether to reply. I hadn't heard from him in months. My hands trembled slightly as I typed back. "About what?" The reply came fast. "Dad wants to meet." I laughed quietly to myself. Of course he did. That Friday, I walked into one of the same restaurants where the Collins family used to dine. The same kind of expensive place where I once felt like I belonged. Now, it felt like a museum of my old life. Richard and Ethan were already there, sitting at a corner table. Richard looked older. His confidence was still there, but something about it had cracked, like a statue with a hidden fracture. "Elena," he said with a stiff smile, standing up, "you look successful." "I am," I said simply, sitting down. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to congratulate you. Lux Tech has made quite an impression." "Thank you," I said, polite but distant. "We worked hard." He nodded, pretending to be casual. "You've done well for yourself. Maybe we can discuss collaboration. A merger, perhaps." "A merger?" The word nearly made me laugh. "Funny," I said softly. "You fired me because you said I wasn't fit for your company, and now you want me to join forces with you." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Elena, please, let's not." I turned to him. "Don't, Ethan. You sat there in silence when your father humiliated me. You don't get to ask for peace now." Richard's smile faltered. "This isn't personal." "Oh, it's very personal," I interrupted. "You didn't just fire me, Richard. You erased me. You made sure every connection I had in the industry was cut. You told people I was unstable, emotional, unprofessional." His jaw tightened. "That was business." I leaned forward. "No, that was ego." The table went silent. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then I stood up. "You taught me something valuable, Richard," I said. "You taught me that people like you only respect power, so I built my own." He swallowed. "Elena." I smiled faintly. "You said I wasn't fit for your company. You were right. I was fit to build my own." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back, not once. That night, I stood outside one of my own stores, the flagship boutique in Manhattan, as the city lights reflected on the glass. The golden letters Lux Tech shimmered above me like a crown I'd built with my bare hands. Maya joined me, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Big meeting?" she asked, grinning. I took the cup from her, smiling. "Bigger realization." "Which is?" "That I don't owe anyone an explanation for my success." She laughed. "You really don't." We stood there, watching people walk in and out of the store, smiling, trying on devices, taking photos. This was what I dreamed of. Freedom. A few weeks later, an article appeared online. Collins Technologies faces decline as Lux Tech dominates luxury market. I read it once slowly, then closed my laptop. There was no satisfaction, no cruelty. Just peace. Because I didn't need them to fail for me to feel complete. I only needed to rise, and I had. Success changed a lot around me, but it didn't change me. I still started my mornings with black coffee and late-night notes scribbled on napkins. I still made time for the small team who helped me build everything from nothing. And I still remembered the woman I used to be scared, lost, betrayed. I carried her with me everywhere. Because she was my foundation. One evening, I was invited to speak at a tech summit, the same kind of event I used to dream of attending as a guest. Now, I was the keynote speaker. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, I took a deep breath and said, 2 years ago, I was told I didn't belong in this industry, that I wasn't strong enough, that I was too emotional. The crowd listened, silent, waiting. I believed them for a while, until I realized something: emotion isn't weakness. It's power. It's the part of us that creates, connects, and changes the world. Applause erupted. I smiled, pausing before finishing. So to anyone who's been told they don't belong, remember this: you don't need permission to rise. Build your table. Start your company. Create your future. Let their rejection be your fuel. The crowd stood and clapped. And in that moment, I felt it: not pride, not revenge, but something bigger. Freedom. After the event, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "Ms. Collins," she said, "I was fired last month. They told me I wasn't good enough. But hearing you, I think maybe I can start something too." I smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't think maybe, know it." She nodded, smiling through her tears. "Thank you." As she walked away, I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who'd ever been underestimated, silenced, or told she didn't belong. That night, as I stood by my window overlooking the city, I whispered to myself. They said I was too emotional. They were right. I smiled softly. Because it takes emotion to dream, it takes emotion to care, and it takes emotion to build an empire from ashes. I closed my eyes and breathed in the silence, the same silence that once felt like defeat. Now it felt like peace. Because when my father-in-law said, "You're fired," he didn't destroy me. He set me free. There's a certain kind of silence that only comes after you've made it. Not the empty silence of defeat, but the calm, golden kind that comes with power. That's what my mornings felt like now. The hum of city traffic below my penthouse, the soft glow of the sunrise spilling across glass walls, and the quiet knowledge that I'd built all of this with my own 2 hands. No one could fire me anymore. No one could decide my worth. Not Richard. Not Ethan. Not anyone. It had been 2 years since Lux Tech first launched. In that time, the company had exploded across the world: stores in 5 countries, hundreds of employees, celebrity partnerships, global press coverage. Every time someone wore one of our halo bracelets on a red carpet or posted about it online, I felt like I was watching my dream walk out into the world, elegant, untouchable, unstoppable. People called me the woman who built an empire from betrayal. But I didn't think of it that way. To me, Lux Tech wasn't built on revenge. It was built on rebirth. Of course, success brought attention. And attention brought the past back. One morning, my assistant walked into my office, her face pale. "Ms. Collins," she said carefully, "there's a situation you might want to see." I frowned. "What is it?" She handed me her tablet. On the screen was a headline that made my heart go still. Collins TCHNOLOGS files for bankruptcy after major investor pulls out. I stared at it, reading the words over and over. Richard's company, the empire he once thought would last forever, was collapsing. Later that afternoon, Rena stopped by my office. "Have you seen the news?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes." She studied my face. "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "Lighter." Rena smiled faintly. "You earned this peace, Alina. Don't let anyone take it from you, not even him." Still, part of me couldn't stop remembering the day he fired me. The way he said, you were never fit for this company. The way Ethan looked down, silent and ashamed. And now, the company that had thrown me away was sinking. I didn't want to feel satisfaction. But maybe I did a little. Because the truth was, I had once built his dreams for him. Now I'd built my own, and it was stronger. A week later, my assistant came into my office again, nervous. "There's someone here to see you," she said. I looked up. Who? She hesitated. "Richard Collins." The air in the room seemed to freeze. For a moment, I didn't speak. Then I said calmly, "Send him in." He walked in slowly, not the towering, confident man I remembered, but smaller somehow. His once perfect suit hung loosely, his shoulders bent with the weight of something heavier than age, failure. "Hello, Alina," he said quietly. I nodded. "Richard." He looked around my office, the tall windows, the awards, the gold logo of Lux Tech behind my desk. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he sighed, "You've done well for yourself." "Yes," I said evenly, "I have." He gave a small, sad smile. "Better than me, it seems." I didn't answer. He sat down across from me, his eyes weary. "I won't waste your time. I came here to ask for help." The words hit me like a quiet explosion. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Help?" He nodded. "Collins Technologies is falling apart. Investors are leaving. The market's changed. I don't have the resources anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the resources you once said I wasn't fit to handle?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, those." I could almost feel the echo of my younger self sitting across from him years ago. The desperate woman begging for respect, humiliated and broken. Now the roles were reversed. And I had every reason to say no. But I didn't. "Not yet." "What kind of help are you asking for?" I said finally. He hesitated. "A merger, a partnership, anything. If Lux Tech were to acquire Collins Technologies, it would save hundreds of jobs." I looked at him, my voice calm, "And save your name." He didn't deny it. "Do you know what irony is, Richard?" I asked quietly. "It's being fired by a man who said I'd never understand business, and then having him come to me for a deal." He looked down. "I deserve that." I stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, alive, glowing, mine. For years, I'd dreamed of this moment, of standing tall while he stood small. And yet, now that it was real, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. I turned back to him. "I'll think about it." He looked surprised. "You will." I didn't say yes, I said, "but I'll think about what saving your company really means, for me, not for you." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." Then, as he stood to leave, he stopped and looked at me. "I was wrong about you, Alina," he said quietly. "You were never emotional, you were passionate, and passion built this." For a moment, I almost saw the man I once respected, not as my enemy, but as a lesson. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. He nodded once, eyes heavy with regret, and walked out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had led to this point. The pain, the long nights, the loneliness. I remembered crying in my car after losing everything. And now, I was being asked to save the same man who had thrown me away. I didn't know if that was strength or irony, maybe both. At sunrise, I stood on my balcony, watching the city wake up. I realized something then. Power isn't just about winning. It's about deciding who you become once you do. The next morning, I called Rena. "I've made my decision," I said. She hesitated. "You're going to buy them, aren't you?" "Yes," I said, "but not to save them." "What then?" "To rebuild them the right way." 2 weeks later, the deal was official. Lux Tech acquired Collins Technologies. The press went wild. Alina Collins buys out former CEO father-in-law's company. From fired to founder, Lux Tech's ultimate power move. When I walked into the old Collins headquarters, it didn't feel like walking into an enemy's building. It felt like returning to the scene of a battle, one I had already won. The boardroom was just as I remembered, cold, gleaming, unforgiving. But this time, I sat at the head of the table. I looked around at the faces, new and old, and said, "From today, this is no longer Collins Technologies. It's Lux Systems, a branch of Lux Tech, and we will lead with innovation, not intimidation." The room erupted in applause. For a brief second, I thought of Richard sitting there years ago, telling me I didn't belong. Now, my voice was the one echoing off the walls. After the meeting, I found him waiting outside my office. He looked up as I approached. "You really did it," he said quietly. "Yes," I said, "and it's only the beginning." He smiled faintly. "You've become everything I once hoped Ethan would be." I froze, not expecting that. "Then maybe," I said gently, "you taught me more than you realized by showing me exactly what not to become." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I suppose that's fair." We stood there for a moment, two people bound by the same story, but changed by it in different ways. Finally, he whispered, "I'm proud of you." I didn't respond. I just smiled softly and walked away. Months passed. Under Lux Tech, the old company began to grow again, stronger, more ethical, more human. Sometimes, I'd visit the old boardroom just to remind myself where I came from. Not out of pride, but out of gratitude. Because without that moment of betrayal, none of this would exist. One night, as I sat alone in my office overlooking the skyline, I opened a notebook, the same one I'd used the day I started Lux Tech. The first page still had those words written across the top. Lux Tech, freedom, future. And beside it, I added something new. Forgiveness. Because I finally understood that letting go wasn't weakness. It was victory. When I left the office, I walked through the quiet halls, lights dimmed, machines humming softly. Every sound felt like a heartbeat, the heartbeat of something I had built, something alive. Outside, the city lights glittered like they were applauding me. And I whispered into the night. They said I wasn't fit for their empire. So I built my own. And then I bought theirs. People talk about revenge like it's an ending. But for me, it was never about ending anything. It was about beginning, again and again, until I became the woman I was meant to be. Because power isn't what you take back. It's what you create when no one believes in you. And as I stood there, looking out over my city, I smiled. My story had come full circle. And this time, I owned it. Success feels different when you no longer chase it to prove something. It stops being a weapon and becomes a purpose. That's where I was now, not just winning, but leading. Years had passed since the day I walked out of Richard's boardroom, broken and humiliated. Now, I walked into rooms where people stood when I entered. My name, Alina Collins, wasn't whispered with pity anymore. It was spoken with respect. And yet, I'd learned that respect wasn't the goal. Impact was. Lux Tech had become a global force. We had stores in over 15 countries, a research center in Singapore, and partnerships with top design houses. But my favorite part wasn't the luxury or the numbers. It was the people, the young innovators, the dreamers, the ones who reminded me of myself when I had nothing but faith and fire. I'd built an empire, yes. But now I wanted to build something bigger, a legacy that would outlive me. It started one afternoon during a mentorship event. A girl barely 20, shy and nervous, approached me after my talk. "Ms. Collins," she said, twisting her bracelet nervously, "I dropped out of college to start a tech idea. Everyone keeps telling me I'm being unrealistic." I smiled softly. So did everyone who's ever changed the world. Her eyes filled with tears. "But what if I fail?" I leaned forward and said, "Then you'll learn faster than the ones too afraid to try." She laughed through her tears. And that moment stayed with me long after she left. Because I saw myself in her, the woman who once begged for a chance that no one would give. That night, I made a decision. Lux Tech would launch a program, the Rise Initiative, a fund and mentorship network for women starting businesses in tech and design. No biases, no gates. Just opportunity. We started small, 5 grants, a few mentorship sessions. But within a year, it had grown into something massive. Hundreds of women applied. Dozens got funded. And one by one, they began to rise. Each success story felt like healing a part of my own past. One evening, as I reviewed the next round of applications, Maya, now my Chief Operations Officer, came into my office with a grin. "Do you realize what you've built, Alina?" she said. I looked up smiling. "A company." She shook her head. A movement, you're changing how women see power. Her words hit me deeply. For so long, power had been something that hurt me, something men used to silence or control. Now, it was something I shared. That was real victory. Not long after, I got a call I didn't expect. It was Ethan. His voice was hesitant, almost unfamiliar. Elena, Dad, been sick. The doctors aren't optimistic. For a moment, I said nothing. I hadn't spoken to either of them in years. Why are you calling me? I asked quietly. He sighed. He asked for you. My chest tightened. Why me? Because I think he wants to say goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories flooded back, the boardroom, the pain, the humiliation. But there were also flashes of something else. His voice teaching me business basics when I first joined the company, the way he once said, "You have drive, Elena. Don't lose it." Before everything went wrong, there was once respect between us. Maybe this was the moment to end the story properly. I visited him the next day. He was in a private hospital, thinner, older, but his eyes were still sharp. When he saw me, he smiled weakly. You came. I nodded. I did. He gestured for me to sit. You look powerful. I smiled softly. I learned from the best, even if it was the hard way. He chuckled faintly, then coughed. You were right, emotion isn't weakness. I know, I said quietly. He looked at me for a long time, his voice softening. I'm sorry, Elena, for everything, for not seeing what you could be. I swallowed hard. I forgave you a long time ago. He smiled, eyes glistening. Then I can go in peace. We sat there in silence for a long time, not as enemies, not as family, but as two people who had finally understood each other. When I left his room that day, I didn't feel pain. I felt release. Richard passed away a week later. The media tried to spin the story. Tech heiress attends CEO's funeral, from rivals to reconciliation. But I didn't care for the headlines. I went because I needed closure, not for him, but for myself. As I stood by his grave, I whispered, thank you. Because without his betrayal, I wouldn't have found my strength. Sometimes, the people who break you are the same ones who push you toward your purpose. After the funeral, Ethan tried to speak to me. He looked different, humbled, softer somehow. Elena, he said quietly, I know it's late, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry too. I nodded, I know. Can we ever be friends? I thought about it for a moment. Maybe, I said gently, but not today. He nodded, accepting it. You deserve everything you've built. I know, I said, smiling slightly. And I hope someday you build something too for yourself. That was the last time I saw him. And it was enough. Months passed. The world moved on. But inside, I felt different. Calmer. Whole. Free. The fire that once burned from anger now glowed with purpose. I didn't want to destroy anyone anymore. I wanted to build. So I did. Lux Tech expanded into education. We started a foundation to teach young women coding, design, and entrepreneurship. We launched labs in underfunded schools. We offered scholarships. And every time a young woman stood on a stage, presenting her idea, eyes bright with confidence, I saw the future. Not mine. Theirs. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I walked to the rooftop of our headquarters. The city light stretched endlessly below, glowing, alive, full of stories. Maya joined me, holding 2 glasses of champagne. To what? I asked, taking mine. She smiled, to the woman who turned pain into power. I laughed softly, to the team who made it possible. We clinked glasses, the sound sharp and sweet against the night. Later, when everyone left, I stood alone, watching the skyline. I thought about my journey, the betrayal, the fall, the rise, the peace. Every step had hurt. Every step had healed. And now, standing there, I realized something simple but powerful. You can lose everything, your job, your love, your pride. But if you find yourself, you win more than you ever lost. That's what I had done. I walked back to my office, where a framed quote hung on the wall. It read, "She believed she could, and when they said she couldn't, she did." Below it, I'd written my own line in gold ink. And when she did, she helped others do the same. That was my legacy. Not the empire, not the fame, but the freedom I'd passed on. That night before leaving, I turned off the lights in my office and whispered to the darkness. They said I was fired, but really I was freed. The city outside sparkled, reflecting back my truth. And I smiled, knowing that the woman who once broke was now unbreakable. Because real success isn't about revenge. It's about redemption. And mine was complete. There comes a point in life when the applause fades. The headlines quiet down. And all that's left is the sound of your own breathing. For me, that moment came one still morning years later. I stood in front of a mirror in my office. The same mirror I had carried from my first tiny apartment when Lux Tech was just a dream. It was scratched, a little foggy around the edges, but I kept it because it reminded me of where I began. I looked at my reflection, older, sharper, calmer. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who once cried in a parking lot, clutching a pink slip. She wasn't the desperate wife or the broken employee. She was someone entirely new. Someone she had built herself into. But even now, standing at the top, I realized something I hadn't before. Climbing is easy when you're fueled by pain. Staying kind while standing tall, that's the real challenge. Lux Tech had grown beyond anything I ever imagined. We were now a global empire, innovative, sustainable, human-centered. Our devices had become part of people's lives, not just accessories, but companions that connected hearts across the world. But with every new success, there was always the question, where do you go from here? For years, my answer had been simple, up. Keep building, keep winning, keep proving. But lately, that answer didn't feel right anymore. Because what happens when there's no higher mountain left to climb? That's what I was trying to understand. One afternoon, I sat in my office, looking at an old framed photo on my desk. It was from my wedding day, Ethan and I, smiling, young, full of dreams. Back then, I thought love and success came as a package, that having both would mean I made it. But love and success aren't the same language. One needs vulnerability, the other demands resilience. I learned that the hard way. Sometimes, I wondered what my life would have been if I hadn't been fired. If Richard had believed in me. If Ethan had fought for me. Would I have still built Lux Tech? Maybe not. Maybe pain was the fire that forged me. Maya came in quietly that day, holding a folder. She'd grown into a strong, confident woman, once my intern, now my right hand. "You look lost in thought," she said with a small smile. "Just thinking about how far we've come," I said softly. She handed me the folder. "These are the next quarter's projections. We're launching in Dubai next month." I nodded absently. It still feels surreal sometimes. She tilted her head. "You've done the impossible, Alina. You've built a company that stands for something. Not many people can say that." I smiled. "You helped me do it." She laughed. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. I just followed your lead." As she left, I looked around the room, sleek, golden, modern, the reflection of everything I had worked for. And yet, sometimes, I miss the simplicity of that old apartment, where my dream had been just an idea scribbled in a notebook. Back then, I didn't have wealth or fame. But I had purpose. And purpose, I realized, was what kept me alive. That evening, I attended a charity gala for women in tech. It was glamorous. Chandeliers, designer gowns, champagne flutes clinking softly. I was the guest of honor, though I still never got used to that title. As I stepped onto the stage to give my speech, the crowd fell silent. Hundreds of faces looked up at me, expecting wisdom, inspiration, something powerful. I took a deep breath. "When I started this journey," I began, "I thought success was about proving people wrong. I thought it was about power, recognition, being untouchable. But I was wrong." A hush filled the room. "Success is not about revenge," I continued. "It's about redemption of yourself. It's about becoming someone you're proud of when no one's watching." The audience listened, still and quiet. "I used to think the people who hurt me were my enemies," I said softly. "But now I see they were my teachers. They showed me what I was capable of. They gave me the push I didn't know I needed." I paused, looking at the sea of faces, some nodding, some with tears glistening. If you take anything from my story, I said, voice steady, let it be this. You don't have to destroy others to rise. You just have to rise, and let that be your answer. The applause was thunderous. But what stayed with me wasn't the sound. It was the quiet strength in the eyes of those women. The kind I once saw in myself when I finally decided to fight back. After the event, I slipped out early and took a walk through the city. It was late. The streets glowed with golden lights, and the air smelled like rain. I passed by a small electronics store, and in the window was one of our halo bracelets, shining softly under the display lights. A woman inside tried it on, smiling as it wrapped around her wrist. She had no idea who I was. And I liked it that way. Because that was the beauty of what I'd built. It didn't need my name to exist anymore. It lived on its own. The next morning, I met with our global team. People from every continent sat around the table, eager, hopeful, brilliant. I looked at them and said, "You're the heart of this company. Never forget that. I may have started Lux Tech, but you are what keeps it alive." Their smiles said more than words ever could. After the meeting, one of them, a young engineer from India, came up to me and said quietly, "When I got rejected by 3 companies, I almost gave up. Then I saw your story. You made me believe it was possible." Her words touched something deep inside me. I realized that my greatest success wasn't building an empire. It was building belief. Later that week, I flew to London for a speaking engagement. The flight was long, and for once I allowed myself to just stop. No emails. No meetings. No decisions. Just me, the sky, and the quiet hum of the plane. I thought about my younger self again, the girl who dreamed, the woman who fought, the leader who rose. And I smiled because every version of her had mattered. Every pain, every failure, every heartbreak, all of it built the woman sitting here now. When I landed, a journalist was waiting for an interview. They asked me a question that stayed with me. If you could go back in time and change anything, would you? I thought about it for a long moment. No, I said finally. Because if I hadn't been broken, I wouldn't have learned how to rebuild. And if I hadn't been doubted, I wouldn't have learned how to believe in myself. The journalist smiled. So your father-in-law's betrayal was a blessing. I smiled too. Sometimes blessings wear the mask of pain. You just don't see it until much later. That night, after the interview, I looked out from my hotel balcony, the city lights reflecting in the glass, just like my own story reflected back at me. I whispered softly, "I forgive it all, the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness. Because it all led me here." And in that moment, I finally felt peace, real, lasting peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from understanding that you don't have to fight anymore. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the woman who was fired. I don't see the CEO, the empire, or the headlines. I see someone simple, a survivor turned builder. A woman who learned that the greatest victory isn't power or wealth. It's peace. Because true success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right, about who you can become, no matter who tried to stop you. And that's the reflection I carry with me now. The woman in the mirror. Unshaken. Unapologetic. Free. There's a moment at the end of every storm when the air finally feels clean again. When you can breathe without fear. When silence doesn't feel empty, it feels earned. That's what my life felt like now. Calm. Whole. Free. Years had passed since Lux Tech first began. We had grown beyond anything I could have ever imagined. A company, a community, a movement. But what mattered most wasn't how big we became. It was what we stood for. Every product we created carried a story, not of luxury or status, but of resilience. Every woman we hired carried her own victory. Every voice we empowered became part of something greater than all of us. People called me a visionary, a leader, an icon. But deep down, I was just Alina, the woman who refused to stay broken. That morning, I sat by the window of my office, the same corner that once overlooked the chaos of building an empire. Now the city below felt quiet, peaceful. Maya entered with her usual energy, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning, boss," she said, smiling. I grinned. "You still call me that." She shrugged. "It's habit. Besides, you'll always be the reason I believed in myself." I took the cup from her and smiled. "No, Maya, you're the reason I believed in the next generation." She laughed softly, sitting down. "You sound nostalgic." "I am," I admitted. "Lately, I've been thinking about what's next." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I've spent years building this," I said, gesturing around the room. "But maybe it's time to start letting it grow without me." She stared. "You're not leaving, are you?" I smiled gently. "Not leaving, evolving." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty halls of Lux Tech headquarters, quiet, golden, filled with memories. I stopped in front of the large wall display, a timeline of the company's journey. From the first prototype I made in that tiny apartment, to the global brand it had become. Each photo told a story. Late nights, small victories, impossible dreams that somehow came true. And at the very beginning, there was a picture of me, younger, determined, holding a coffee cup in one hand and a design sketch in the other. I touched the glass and smiled. "I did it," I whispered. The next morning, I made an announcement. The entire Lux Tech team gathered in the atrium, hundreds of faces, eyes shining with anticipation. I took the stage, my heart full but steady. "When I started this company," I began, "I had nothing, no investors, no name, no plan. Just a dream that refused to die." They listened, silent and still. I built Lux Tech because I was told I didn't belong. I was told I was too emotional, too fragile, too weak. But I learned that emotion is not weakness. It's our greatest strength. I paused, letting the words sink in. This company was never just mine. It's yours, every one of you who believed, who fought, who gave your hearts to this vision. And now, it's time for it to grow beyond me. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "I'll be stepping down as CEO at the end of this year," I said, smiling through the emotion tightening in my chest. "But don't look sad. This isn't an ending, it's a continuation. Lux Tech doesn't end with me, it begins again with all of you." The room went quiet, then slowly applause began. Soft at first, then louder, fuller, until it filled every corner. I looked out at them, my team, my family, and felt tears burn in my eyes. This was it. The peace I'd been searching for. Later that evening, I went to the lake. The same lake I had driven to the night I was fired, years ago. Back then, I had cried under the stars, lost and afraid. Now I stood on the same shore, the water calm, the air warm, my reflection steady in the surface. It felt like meeting an old version of myself, one who had been broken but never destroyed. I sat on a rock and closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of pine and rain. And I whispered, "You made it, Alina." A few days later, I received a letter, handwritten, elegant. It was from one of the women who had joined the Rise initiative years ago. Her name was Aisha. She had built a small app that was now revolutionizing mental health tracking for women. Her words made me cry. "You once told me that emotion is power." I never forgot that. Because of you, I didn't give up. Because of you, I built something that helps others. Thank you for being the light when I had none. I pressed the letter to my chest. That was my legacy, not the money, not the fame, not the empire. But the spark I left in others. Months passed quietly after that. I began traveling more, visiting the women I'd helped, seeing their companies bloom. In every corner of the world, I met stories that reminded me why I had started in the first place. In India, a young woman had created sustainable solar wearables inspired by Lux Tech's designs. In Brazil, another had launched a coding school for underprivileged girls. In France, one of our first Rise initiative winners had opened a tech-driven art studio. Each story was a ripple, spreading further than I ever could have imagined. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of leading. I felt the joy of watching others lead. One night, while flying back home, I looked out of the plane window. The world below glittered like a map of dreams. I realized something beautiful. Success isn't meant to be held. It's meant to be shared. Because true power isn't what you keep. It's what you pass on. When I returned home, I spent the evening writing. Not a business plan. Not a speech, but a letter to my younger self. Dear Alina, I know you're scared right now. You think the world has ended. But I promise, this ending is your beginning. The day he said, "You're fired," was the day you were set free. The pain will teach you what pride never could. You will build something extraordinary, not to prove them wrong, but to prove you were always enough. You will fall, you will rise, and you will learn that peace is stronger than power. And one day, you'll look in the mirror and see not a survivor, but a creator. A woman who turned betrayal into brilliance. A woman who found her strength not through others, but through herself. Keep going. Your story isn't over, it's just beginning. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in my old notebook, the one that still had those first words written on the front. Lux Tech, freedom, future. I smiled through the tears. Freedom. That's what this had always been about. On my last official day as CEO, I arrived early. The building was still quiet, sunlight spilling across the marble floors. I walked through the halls one last time, touching the walls, the tables, the photographs of every milestone. When I reached the entrance, Maya was waiting. Her eyes shimmered. You ready? I smiled. I've been ready for years. She hugged me tightly. We'll make you proud. You already have, I whispered. As I stepped outside, the city greeted me with the same warmth it once ignored me with. The same streets that once felt cruel now felt like home. I didn't need power anymore. I had peace. That evening, as the sun set, I stood on my balcony, the golden light painting the sky. I raised a glass of wine and whispered to the wind. To the girl who was fired. To the woman who rose. And to the legacy she left behind. Because in the end, I didn't just build a company. I built a life I was proud of. A story that would outlast me. A reminder that no matter who tries to break you, you can rebuild, stronger, wiser, freer. When the last rays of light faded, I closed my eyes and smiled. This was my ending, not of loss, not of revenge, but of becoming. And somewhere deep inside, I heard my own voice. The same one that had whispered to me on the hardest nights. Say softly, "You did it." And for the first time in my life, I finally believed it.